along those lines, a friend of mine who had been at Caltech many years ago told me a story about Yosemite. And he says one day, this fine San Francisco lady had come up in the tour bus. And when she got off the bus, she came up to a park ranger and asked him, "Sir, if you only had 1 hour here at Yosemite, where would you go?" "Well, let me think about that." "Ma'am, I'd go down to the river right over there and sit." And she goes, "Why would you, there's mountains, why would you go there?" "If I only had 1 hour in Yosemite, I'd sit down by the river and cry." Due to the emergent nature of this gathering, I hope we can have a continuing emergent discussion of how Steve Jobs and the people that were literally called to help him manifest some of the very deeply philosophical and spiritual ideas and bring them to the physicality of the pads, the pods, and the phones. John Muir, a man who we are forever ever grateful for his efforts to preserve this place, he said, "When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe." But don't worry about a Pollyanna unicorn lace screed, because I'll get to the dark side eventually. Today, I'm going to share with you stories of the people and events that help create the world of today, and talk freely about the influences and the coming-of-age stories affecting the kids that were born in the mid-1950s, like Steve and Bill Gates and me and several of you guys here. So, those of us growing up wide-eyed, listening to the Beatles, the Grateful Dead, and Pink Floyd, we were too young to enjoy the fruits of free love, but we certainly were attracted to it. Now, the grand narrative, and by that I mean a narrative that our whole society was believing in, was alive and well in 1968. We had a moon to reach. We had Russian Soviets to prove ourselves superior to. And we were in year 2 of Star Trek, and the future was very bright. Stories, that's what we are made of. And civilization provides us with the stories that guide our internal sense of who we are and what our mission is. However, civilization itself is an emergent phenomena. And so our mission evolves. There's the communicator, there's the communicator. It's the same with replicators. Now we have 3D printers that are making body parts for us. It was a story, and it's one we dreamed, and therefore we built it. Our particular story begins in a modest Sunnyvale, California neighborhood with a now fellow Albuquerquean and Apple Computer employee number 1, Bill Fernandez. He's 13 years old. It's 1968, and he invites a scrawny and scraggly-haired classmate over one day. The boy is standing transfixed in front of a Japanese calligraphy like that at Bambi Fernandez. Bambi's from Hawaii. And he's taken by the sheer force of design and simplicity by just a few strokes. The boy is, of course, Steve Jobs. It's Bambi's garage where Bill introduces Steve to Woz, and both Bill and Bambi went on to play major roles, major roles in how you have come to have a Unix box in your hand. So coming of age in a very psychedelic Bay Area, where the next big thing in consciousness is finding out how to reach the ecstatic highs of a fully functioning brain on LSD simply by learning to do ancient, mystical, state-producing practices like yoga, meditation, chanting, dancing, prayer, and in the fashion of how the hippies learned to go back to the earth using a manual. It was sort of the Stack Overflow of the day. The Whole Earth Catalog, there was also a manual to learn about spirituality and learning about ways of technosis. So this book, Be Here Now, was written by Ram Dass, formerly known as Richard Alpert, a colleague of Tim Leary's at Harvard. He had done the LSD and then thought, well, what about how you can make this all the time? And that is where the book Be Here Now became a breakthrough text for the young counterculture that is trying to learn everything it can as fast as it can about world religions and whatnot. And I began doing yoga myself in 1970, and it's helped me with code and burnout and surviving sitting. And basically, I know Steve was very taken by this because he and Daniel Kotke went to India to seek out Ram Dass's guru. This is Neem Karoli Baba, who Ram Dass talks about in Be Here Now. And Steve and Daniel went to India to seek this man's company. And this is pretty much what we looked like back then. Now, while Steve and those guys were working on the Apple II, I was in New Mexico building solar and bootstrapping all that. But it was in June of 2012 when the Department of Defense, through a FOIA from the Daily Mail, decided they got a hold of the documents where Steve talks about his early psychedelic drug use. And from the Daily Mail, it wasn't a secret that Steve Jobs dabbled in recreational drugs, but new Pentagon files revealed just how much he valued the mind-altering substances, crediting his LSD use with having a life-changing effect on him. In a government security questionnaire filled out in '88 and released in June 2012, the late Apple founder divulged he took LSD up to 15 times between '72 and '76. While he said he had no words to explain how he reacted to the hallucinogenic drug, he told the Department of Defense officials, "It was a positive, life-changing experience for me, and I'm glad I went through that experience." So that next decade, Apple's just taking off, and legend has it that Steve even encouraged other engineers to try LSD. Well, some of the great Macintosh software titles were envisioned while high on acid, but that was to be expected by this time because it had been almost a decade since Francis Crick made breakthroughs into the helical nature of DNA on an LSD trip in 1967. Well, as I said, meanwhile, I'm hanging with the counterculture in New Mexico, learning about solar energy. And the one thing I want to remind you before you use the word dirty before describing a hippie, remember solar energy, green building, the use of cannabis and psychedelics for well-being and healing, organic gardening and urban homesteading, all highly desirable top-shelf commodities today, but remember where they came from. So for me, doing that was fun, but it wasn't enough. There wasn't enough excitement in gardening for me. So I knew something was missing. And in '85, somebody showed me a Mac. And I'm like, oh my God, I've got to. So I started using this for my working drawings and plans. And then Red Rider, bulletin boards, other people to talk to. That was amazing. That was the proto-internet, really. because, the whole idea that we were connecting our computers to each other. And of course, it was all done on a 300 baud modem, so it wasn't so fast. But a lot like what happened to Jamie, I had to do a lot of things before I found what I loved. And I didn't know what I loved until I went to Macworld in 1987. And at that time, Bill Atkinson is doing a pre-ship demo of HyperCard. And he is showing how anybody can just drag and drop. And, I don't even know if they had drag and drop then. They didn't. But whatever it was, a regular person could make software just by clicking things. And the thing is, I heard Bill talking up there, and he was so excited and so passionate. And he had this entire audience enthralled. And I knew in my heart, I want to be just like Bill. I want to be a programmer. I want to get up and talk to people about how excited I am about this stuff. And it's like, it was really cool because out of nowhere last year, I get this email from Rick Strassman. And he goes, oh, this guy wants to talk to you. I don't know, whatever. He's Bill Atkinson. I gave him your email. I hope that's okay. And of course it was okay. It was fabulous because to have that full circle where the person who inspires you to go out on this journey of 25 years or 30 years, that person, that one day they touch you, you didn't even go up and shake his hand, but it didn't matter. You felt that guy's energy. That's the kind of thing, that's the kind of magic that now that I'm not coding all the time, I can go around and do. And so what I did was I got the first HyperCard I could find in town. I started designing a stack around the Mayan icons because that was really popular back then. And it sucked me in so deeply, I quit building buildings and I just started coding on HyperCard. And it wasn't long before, I had made enough stacks where I'd attracted some attention and these guys wanted me to put my stacks in the book. And I had written an SDK for HyperCard as well as an automatic quiz maker that a teacher could come up with a few questions and then it would automatically make a test and then grade the students' tests for them automatically. It was like so before the PARCC tests, it's ridiculous. But it was all possible with HyperCard and imagination. And so the interesting thing is that this happened. Steve had left Apple in 1986, disappears, and then in 1988, all of a sudden, he's sending people around the country, and they always inevitably dress like he did here with the little black tie and the white shirts. And I don't know if he knows this, but that's exactly the way the Mormon missionaries dress in South America and whatnot. And so there really was sort of a mission and a missionary aspect to thinking of technology as being the next thing that's going to enable the spirit of humanity to take it to the next level. However, so I invited these guys to dinner because I say, hey, we're having an Albuquerque. The mug in Albuquerque is Albuquerque. Hey, we're having a meeting tonight. Can you guys come and demo the cube there? And they're like, sure. Can we take you out to dinner? And we're like, sure, we'll go to the most expensive restaurant in town. Let's go. And by the end of the meal, they had figured out that they were going to ask us to become developers. So they had and we're thinking, $10,000 for a cube, $2,000 for a laser writer, and $2,000 because you have to go to developer camp. Now, okay, that's $14,000, but that's 1989. So that's $30,000 today. So you can see the head rubbing as everybody goes, this is the next big thing. But who can afford it? Who's going to buy it? If nobody writes software, there won't be a next big thing. So Chris Jensen, she was the president of Albuquerque, and me, and we'd both done well in our earlier careers, so it wasn't like we were, it wasn't our last 30,000 or 15 at the time. But it was like we said, if we don't do this, it ain't happening. It like came down to the realization that, oh my God, if I don't step up. And now, that's such a critical juncture in my life story, really, because that was the risk. But the payoff was, I'm going to go be hanging with these guys who have done some of the coolest stuff in the world, and now it's this tiny little company. It's just a few people. And there's something about the pain that Steve knew about from reading Be Here Now. This is George Gurdjieff. He was a mystic in the early part of the last century. And he had this one thing. He always made people pay for their spiritual lessons. And he was asked about that. He goes, why? He goes, we're living in a materialist society. If people don't pay for something, they will assign no value to it. If it was free, they won't take it seriously. So maybe that was it. It was sort of a barrier, a little bit of a barrier. But anyway, we go to camp. I mean, the whole idea of going to camp, I mean, and who are your teachers at camp? It was Bruce Blumberg and Randy Nelson. Randy's pictured here. He was also part of the Flying Brothers Karamazov in Santa Cruz, a crazy juggling team that made its mark by juggling chainsaws and stuff like that. So next camp is it's like, first of all, I go there thinking, oh wow, everybody in California is gonna be so much smarter than me. I'm from little Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's podunk. We don't know anything. So I better read all the documents before I go. So, I read that. And then when I get there, I realize nobody had even cracked the book yet. So I was coding away and I go, look guys, look what I made. I can do, it's just like the laser writer, because back then, if we wanted to see something groovy, we would write a program, send it to the laser writer, it prints out, look, I made a recursive tree. And what Steve had done is taken the laser writer technology from Adobe and put it on the screen. So basically, you could just say, draw a circle, and there it is. And it would scale infinitely, of course, because it's math, it's not bits. But there was a problem with Steve and Adobe. Here's what it was. The Windows server that Adobe had sold him, the only way the NeXT engineers could look at the source code was to go into this one locked room with an Adobe engineer and look at the code. So basically what ended up happening was there were bugs and they weren't being fixed. Leo Horvitz was the main Windows Server guy at NeXT and just a wonderful human being. I think that is when, Adobe. But Steve learned his lesson and he decided that everything on Mac OS X would be rolled from scratch and he would own it. And Ralph Brunner and Stan Gierman, they, like me, were other NeXT developers. They had a house called Caffeine Software and made Tiffany, a fabulous Photoshop killer, really. And these guys, of course, were snapped up like so many other of the NeXTSTEP developers, because, we'll get to that later. Let's get through the dark stuff first, which is, here's Steve in '89. And so 4 months after my next camp, I'd gotten TextArt ready to version 1.0. So I'm going to go to Redwood City, meet Steve personally for the first time and demo it to him. So when I saw that corporate look, I said, okay. I put on my best blue suit, Hermes tie. I was ready to look the part of these guys. It was really frightening, that first time because he like storms into the room like he's doing 50 things at once, and he just is there. So I know it's no time for pleasantries. I just demo the software. He goes, oh, that's great. That's on. He said, and you should sell it for $49. I go, Steve, the optical disc it comes on are $49. And then he thinks for a little while. They like it. And then he comes back to me and he goes, how would you like to make the database for the NeXT? And I'm like, wait a minute. How has it come that down to the fact that Steve Jobs is asking a New Mexican cyberpunk hippie to build something that important for the platform? But the reason was the successful Mac houses, they weren't buying in. They were like, no, we have what we need. We're doing great. And so it turned out that Steve had to basically recruit a new generation of developers for the NeXT. But he promised me I'd make a lot of money. I did. But the thing about that was I was developing the DataPhile, is what the database was called. I was developing it using shared frameworks with the thing I was really into, Create, my illustration and design package. And so it turned out that because I made this very multimedia-rich database, then it was fun for me to do too. It wasn't just a database. Sorry, I know we've come a long way since databases were like that, but I tell you, back then they really were. But it lets you just kind of draw and do the thing. It was great, it was fun. But what was more fun was the fact that we could be part of something from the beginning. And more than anything, really, is that it was about the community. It was about the people that had come to be around Steve's campfire. And today I want you to meet Bambi Fernandez. This is a recent picture of her. Because of, you're not going to hear in any of those tomes about Steve Jobs or multiple movies about Bambi. And yet, as like a mothering figure for Steve, at NeXT, she was like his administrative assistant for a while. And then later at Apple, she was Avi Tevadian's AI administrative assistant for many, many years. But what she did was provide all of the little developer shops that were, the NeXT developers. She would be like the human interface for Steve. So, she was the friendly, sweet voice that was going to help you get what you needed done. Where Steve might have said, why the hell isn't that thing done? And so it's just sort of like, it's really important to understand that Steve was an incredible human being. But his power lay in the kind of people who were attracted to hang with him. And I'm looking at him. And so you know exactly what I'm talking about. But this was not like now. This was a time when no matter what Steve and the marketing team tried to do, there was failure. So at first it started out, it was just academia was the perfect people who would love Webster's Online, Shakespeare, and mostly the ability for educated scientists and people who already know how to think about their domain, their problem domain. It gave them the tools to write their own software. This is the first time drag and drop was made so people would see an interface builder demo and go, I can make software. The same sort of feeling I got when I saw HyperCard the first time. So the academia could not afford it. Sure, all the gold-plated schools, Stanford, CMU, all those guys bought some. And that was great for all of us developers. I mean, we still had plenty of sales. But in terms of the big market, it wouldn't take off. So then they go after publishing. They go to the Siebold conferences and stuff. And yet, I'm a little bit concerned that Americans love their heroes to death. You know, they bring them up, and then once they're up there, so that's sort of what we were suffering from. It was like there was no buy-in. And so Steve went after the publishing, still no buy-in. So what's left? Who's left after that? Well, I'll tell you who's left. Fortune 500 and the military-industrial complex. On to Wall Street and the National Security Agency. Well, these clients certainly had the cash missing in other markets, but geez, this is feeling desperate, especially for someone familiar with the Buddhist precept of right livelihood. Steve had gone to India to seek enlightenment, only to sell out his soul to Babylon? So, from my point of view, well, actually, it turned out that the successes weren't going to be around the hardware at all, but in the software stack. And we'll talk about that in just a sec. But speaking of right livelihood, here I have all this money from the NSA. What am I going to do with it? So we decide. I'd made friends with John Barlow, who has a lot of San Francisco buddies and whatnot. So we decided that in karmic retribution for taking the NSA money, that we would turn the Palace of Fine Arts into this. They had barely even had the word rave yet. You know, that's how this is coming on. So one artist had like put projectors on poles on either side of the room, and they were kind of synchronized. So like you'd be in Yosemite for a while, and all of a sudden it would change, and you'd be in a Greek, Palladio kind of thing. And basically, I had met John Barlow when he interviewed me for the Next World magazine. And since we were both deadheads running cubes in the Rocky Mountains, about the four of us, we became friends. And we kind of felt like the next world had gotten a little too corporate, a little too buttoned down. We felt like Steve, what happened? You forgot about everything we were going to do, all the craziness, all the wildness, all the ecstasy and joy. And so, what can I say? It was, as far as marketing goes, there was no better marketing than throwing an outrageous party that everybody's talking about for years. At first, I heard Steve talking to a guy go, "Oh, what a waste of money." And then the next year, they were doing it. So, you know how it goes. At first, if it's, it feels, oh. But at the time in San Francisco, we're witnessing a new renaissance of psychedelics. This is the early 90s. Terence McKenna is becoming kind of a household name. Alexander Shulgin has been experimenting with making psychedelics based on his MMDA, but twisting a few molecules here and there just to see what happens. And it's a time where I guess the old counterculture has decided, oh my God, we're in our 40s and 50s. We don't have to not talk about the transgressions of our youth, as it were. Psychedelics don't lead to drug use. I mean, the kind of drugs we're talking about today are endogenously produced. That means your own pineal gland does the production of this endogenous or internally produced chemical, dimethyltryptamine. So, how did I find out about all this? Well, here's what's going on. Actually, I don't know if I'm right there or not, but I'm everywhere at the same time, which is the fractal nature of the universe, so it really doesn't matter. Inviting the deadheads and the cipher freaks and all those cool friends of Barlow's and John Gilmore's was really a way to mix up the crowd of the next, you know, these guys from the NSA wanting to talk to me about my database when I'm very high. No, thank you. It really was a scene. And as we ended up, after the first rave, we ended up throwing 2 more raves, which corresponded with the Next World conventions in 93 and 94. So they got bigger and crazier as we started inviting our freaky San Francisco friends for entertainment. But it was the second rave in 93 that got immortalized in Ira Glass's This American Life. Number 74, Conventions. He talks with John Perry Barlow about love at first sight. And you can see John with Cynthia on the first day they ever knew each other. Now, they were elevated on a bit. That could have helped for the love, you know. But what I want to say about those raves was the basic core thing about the NeXT community, which is the community that was self-identifying as NeXT had a place to come together and, well, in the style of the Grateful Dead, take sacrament and create magic together. From a guerrilla marketing standpoint, the raves were solid gold, still reverberating through the years, with the couples that fell in love that night still in love now. The business relationships built from the very deep place of nowhere and know when. That's the NeXT community. In fact, I'd like to point out Bill Bumgarner, and then one person behind the kunga, behind that is Christine Palmieri, his wife. And so it was like they didn't even know they were coming together. And so so what's going on now? Now it's 1984. The NeXT hardware is end of life. There's no way a small company can keep up the R&D effort with the big guys. So Steve just bails on the hardware and says, we're running with the software stack. And we port it to all the big iron of the day, HP, what were they? I don't even, HPPA and the Sun Sparks and the Intels. And basically, but you got to think about the difference between then and now. When I sold 1 copy of DataPhile, it's $700. That's the equivalent of selling 1,000 $1 apps today. So it's just, I mean, it's crazy. So many things have changed. So what's happening? Well, he's still not making a lot of sales. We're making, and he's making one final effort. We're going to port NeXTSTEP, or I mean OpenStep at the time, to Solaris, to run on top of the Sun's new groovy, meant to get Sun out of being just a piece of iron and onto the desktop. Well, we sold 5 copies of Create before, without any warning and without any announcement, Solaris, the port to Solaris is just vanished. Now, I'm one of the only developers left with Steve at this time. Everybody else is, they like had decided it wasn't going to go anywhere. It was like Omni and us. Now, Omni, I don't know what they were on, but you've heard about Steve's this reality distortion field, that he will be able to come into a room and no matter what you believed before, you will be believing this now. So I had time in this dark time where things are kind of collapsing, and yet I love my software. I love keeping it going. And so it turned out that I got to be involved in the first human psychedelic research that was government sanctioned in the early 1990s. And what was interesting about this experimentation was that it was something that was not even that well known. DMT was not a popular drug by any means. It had never gained the popularity of pot and mushrooms or anything. People didn't know much about it. And one of the reasons was because Burroughs had written a terribly nasty treatise on how terrible this was. Apparently he had overdosed on it. How terrible it was. And I don't know what to say about that, honestly. But to be able to participate in something that historic was like the thing that was feeding my soul while the NeXT was in the dark. And it was the thing that kept giving me hope out of nowhere. And when we finished the experiment, it was just going to be a paper behind a paywall somewhere. So I talked to Rick and I said, you know what? I'm going to ask Barlow if he'll ask the Grateful Dead if they'll donate some money so you can write a book. And they did it, which was really hip and made me feel like, yes, everything in the world's connected. This is awesome. And so out of that research came this book, which is very interesting to read. And I dare you to figure out which of the participants is me. Because he kind of dresses you up. He doesn't say software engineer. He kind of, whatever. And there was a time when people may have been concerned about their privacy around this. But no, I believe everything is known. I know, I read. Edward Snowden told me. So it doesn't matter. And as far as the West goes, historically, the West's embracement of materialism has limited research of consciousness, even questioning its existence. Materialism holds that the body is a machine, the mind is a phenomena of the physical brain, matter is inanimate, etc. And so the West was the last to the DMT table, where scores of South American tribes have discovered different herbal formulas to allow DMT to enter the brain before being metabolized, just allowing the experient to watch the core manifestation of existence and perceive that you are part of it, and in some odd, weird, paradoxical manner, you are all of it. Luckily, the experience is 100% scientifically replicable on everyone, which means basically that we're all mystics if we pay attention to that component of ourselves. So I believe that our circuitry has this avatar state capability, and techniques like yoga, meditation, fasting, dance, drumming, chanting, and psychedelics engage it. Computers and information and the internet as of today are like a pale shadow against the backdrop of a fully operational brain. The cosmic web is our true home, and it is everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. No now, ever when. I look forward to the day when the metamind evolves as we plug our individual consciousnesses into the awareness of the animate universe. So in 2007, an Austin filmmaker took the book and made it into a movie, which has had quite a nice run in the documentary world. And that's interesting. It's kind of an odd presentation, but it's an odd subject. Anyway, that's sort of what got me through that really dark period, was that it's not just technology. It's also our spiritual lives and our inner lives that are going to be able to keep us up when things get down. And then somebody calls me, Andrew, what does this mean? I go, it means I just got a raise. So Apple buys NeXT for $428 million and 1.5 million shares of stock. And now, what was cool about this was Omni and me were like, yeah, you see, if you stay with it long enough. So Apple calls me, they send me to Redwood City. And I don't know if you knew this about NeXT, but Steve had what he called the carpet rule. So there's this beautiful IMK stairwell to the second floor at the NeXT headquarters. And upstairs is carpet. So the carpet rule is nobody outside of NeXT is allowed up there. So Apple buys NeXT, all the rules go out the window. And now I have my own office, all the rug I want up there. And I have Jean-Marie Hulot's legendary espresso machine at my beck and call to make the port of Create to the PowerPC. So that, you know, in terms of story, that was a great story. I got to demo, Guy Kawasaki did the keynote in Boston that year. I guess that was 97. And yeah, because Steve hadn't come back yet. And I'm trying to explain to Gil Amelio, CEO of Apple before Steve, why object-oriented programming was the way to go. And he has the most befuddled look upon his face. I knew he wasn't going to get it. But anyway, I'm not really going to go much into after that point. Basically, I was able to port all my NeXT software and write some more while we're waiting for the 5 years for macOS 10 to ship. And, you know, over time, I got a bunch of software out and blah, blah, blah. And there was a grand feeling of having chosen the underdog's underdog and being part of a small team of people that led our stray puppy home. And being part of the next 18 years when this underdog's becomes the world's most profitable corporation and replaces the mighty AT&T on the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Being an underdog sort of person, I can see that after almost 30 years and 30 apps and applications, my work here is done. And we thought, you know, it was copacetic. Everything's cool, yeah. What a long, strange trip it's been. On final reflection, I realized it was to Steve that I had my loyalty. And I really do thank Edward for helping me understand that, you know, that there is a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. And what's so ironic to me in today's world is that it's us doing it ourselves freely, notoriously, openly, tagging our friends, revealing everything to everyone. And, but we knew that was going on. We didn't know about this, though. We didn't know about this until March 10th. So we are confronted again with a true test of our morality and faith. On March 10th, 2015, Jeremy Scahill of The Intercept published some of Snowden's documents that lay out how the CIA and Sandia National Laboratories, yes, the one in Albuquerque, New Mexico, have hacked the iPhone and iPad. However, what is so egregious, immoral, and unethical that it staggers, at least my imagination, our federal government was invading individual iOS developer machines, inserting keyloggers, and whacking Xcode. Now, check this out. I don't have to hack millions of your phones. I just need to hack this developer who has this privacy app over here with point-to-point communication. So what they were doing was insert it. In fact, the hilarity of this whole thing is, if you guys have a computer science background at all, you know about the Turing Award. The ACM gives it out every year. And in '84, Ken Thompson received the award. And in his talk, he decided to show people how you could hack a compiler so that you wouldn't even know that it was hacked. because you could read the source code, but you'd be using the hacked compiler to build it. So even though you can't see, the source code looks clean, but it's inserting this malware. Apparently in the build system, they've engineered a way to put in the payload that would then take possession of your phone only in the developer's build that he submits to Apple. That's the one IPA we can't test, right? We build, we test and we test and we test. We build the IPA, we pray like hell, send it off to Apple. So I was very, very disappointed that the media's response, New York Times, not even covered. Maybe a small thing online. So where's the media? Shall we pretend that none of this is happening? That there is not homeland security everywhere? There are philosophers and people of conscience, including here. Luckily, I know every spook has a soul. And every participant in the police state can awaken, can repudiate a surveilled world. So here we are at the balance point between alternate futures, one driven by fear, power, and corruption, and one driven by love, consciousness, and awakening. As we relegate more and more tasks to computers and robots, what is it exactly we are trying to achieve? A total disentanglement from physical life? Or is it time to ponder the big questions? Luckily, we have more advice, good advice from John Muir. Climb the mountains and get their good tidings. Nature's peace will flow into you as sunshine flows into trees. The winds will blow their own freshness into you, and the storms their energy, while cares will drop off like autumn leaves. Thank you very much.